Good morning, third graders. Today I'm going to be able to finish the book Summer of the Woods, and I'm going to give you a preview of book 2. So, here we go with chapter 11. It's called The Summer's End. August pulled to a lazy close, with folks too weary from the humidity to celebrate much. Derek's ankle gradually healed to the point that he didn't need crutches anymore, just a protective boot on his foot. He'd gotten pretty good at hobbling around the house, and he was ready to get back outside. He sat on his bed and looked up at the wall where a big new frame hung over his desk. A few days after the police took the coins back to the museum, a newspaper reporter for the Virginia Times had interviewed Derek and Sam about the whole discovery. The next week, their picture was on the front page. Local boys discover stolen coins, the headline read. Below it, in smaller print, it said, "Brothers turn summer into real-life treasure hunt." A picture of them, each holding up one of the Indian head cents, filled up the bottom corner of the page. "Look, Derek," Sam had said, "we're front page news." Derek smiled just thinking about it again. It was pretty cool. Dad had purchased a bunch of extra copies so that they could save them. He took one copy of the front page and had it framed alongside the newspaper heading from August 8, 1953, when the coins had been stolen. In between the newspaper pages was the Indian head cent that had been in the box from the secret compartment. Dr. Evanshade had let them keep it since it wasn't officially part of the treasure from the cave, and because the boys were so excited about it. It wasn't one of the 1877 coins, but it was still awesome. Derek decided to give a small part of his reward money to Henry and Alex since they had rescued him from the cave. He figured that if he died alone in the cave, it wouldn't much matter how much reward money he had. Dad called that a good first step towards making better decisions. Derek suggested that they hide the reward money in the secret compartment in the wall for safekeeping, but his parents thought a better place would be at the bank, in a new college savings account. September meant that it was time for school to begin. The boys' first time going to school in Virginia. Sam and Derek thought back to all that had happened in just a few short months and marveled. It seemed like just yesterday that they had first set eyes on the creek, climbed up the big boulder, and run from Alex, Henry, and a bear in the woods. The two brothers pulled on their backpacks and walked together down the street from their cul-de-sac to wait for the bus. Mom and Dad had agreed to watch from the driveway so that the boys could make a good first impression with their new busmates. It was nice that the street had little traffic with not much worry of a truck running them down. The bus, or the yellow chariot, as Mom liked to call it, pulled up with a roar and the door opened. The boys looked back to their house. Mom and Dad waved. Sam waved back. Derek gave a slight nod, took a deep breath, and carefully hobbled up the steps. He was determined not to fall down and look stupid in front of the new kids. That would definitely not be a first good impression. Sam stepped on, looked at the driver, a woman with a friendly face, short hair, and a tie-dyed shirt. She said hello and told them to sit wherever they liked today. As they looked down the aisle at the new faces and tried to decide which seat to take, they heard someone calling their names. "Hey, Derek! Sam! Back here!" The boys looked down the aisle and saw Henry sitting in a three-seater by himself. Alex was right behind him. Derek and Sam sat down next to the familiar faces. "Hey, guys," Alex called to some other boys sitting across from him. "These are the dudes I was telling you about who found the coins in the cave." "No way," said an older boy with red hair. "I heard that you got a reward and everything. We saw it in the newspaper. That was you?" The whole bus turned and stared at Derek and Sam, everyone's eyes fixed on them in awe. A pretty girl with blonde hair in the next seat looked over at Derek with a sparkle in her eyes. "I heard you were trapped in the cave alone. You must have been scared," she said. "Nah, not really, but it was pretty wild," said Derek, smiling confidently. I could have died. Sam rolled his eyes. Oh, brother, he moaned. He could tell that all this attention was going to go to Derek's head. The boys spent the rest of the bus ride recounting their adventures and how they had stumbled upon the lost coins. The kids on the bus leaned over their seats and listened to every word and asked all kinds of questions. Not a bad first impression, thought Derek. When the bus pulled up to the school, Henry offered to help Derek with his backpack since his leg was hurt. "What teacher do you have?" asked Henry. "Mrs. Lincoln Muller, I think that is how you say it," said Derek. "No way, that's who I have too. That's radical. Let's go." Derek was excited to have someone he knew in his class. He turned to Sam as they entered the building. "See you on the way home, Sam. Good luck." Sam looked a bit uncertain, but then a couple of kids from the bus started talking to him more about the coins and led him into the school. He looked over his shoulder and nodded to Derek and smiled as if he'd be all right. Derek and Henry sat next to each other in their classroom and emptied their backpacks. Mrs. Lincoln Muller was a tall, thin, older woman with big, dark-rimmed glasses that made her look like a librarian. She wasn't as old as Mr. Haskins, but she was old. She stood up in front of the classroom and welcomed everyone back for the new school year. "The first thing we'll do in 4th grade this year, boys and girls, is talk about what we did on our summer vacation. Now, I know that it's hard sometimes to think of anything exciting, but I want each of you to really try to think of your favorite time." Derek turned and looked at Henry and gave him a sly smile. Henry chuckled. "Okay, now who would like to go first?" said the teacher. Derek shot his hand up. This was going to be fun. And that is the end of the book, Summer of the Woods, Virginia Mysteries, Book 1. And it was written, hold on here, it's written by Stephen K. Smith. And like I told you before, this is part of a whole series. So maybe you'll want to read some more of these over the summertime. The next one, Book 2, and I'm going to start that just so you can maybe get hooked on it and maybe ask Mom and Dad if you can get this book. It's called Mystery on Church Hill, The Virginia Mysteries, Book 2. And here's the cover of it. And I just have a couple chapters, I think, from this book. So here we go. Chapter 1, The Field Trip. The line inched forward 1 millimeter at a time. Sam's stomach growled so loudly he thought everyone around him could hear it. "What's taking so long?" he moaned. He peered over the counter at the lunch ladies. With robot efficiency, they refilled shiny metal containers with stalks of green broccoli and a few hundred overprocessed chicken nuggets. It looked kind of gross, but at this point, Sam was so hungry he'd eat just about anything. "Growl," his stomach cried out again. He glanced up the line at Caitlin Murphy to see if she noticed. She had a smirk on her face, like she knew something. But that was how she always looked, so he couldn't tell if it was because of him. "Is that organic broccoli?" Caitlin asked one of the lunch ladies through a cloud of steam rising in the air. Good grief. Caitlin was always acting like she was too good for everything and smarter than everybody. The lunch lady ignored her and turned to load more of what the school tried to pass off as food. Sam wasn't so sure it was. He suspected that they mixed up dirt and sawdust in the kitchen and pretended it was nutritious. At least that's how it tasted most of the time. "Let's move, Jackson." Sam felt a tray jab him in the back and rolled over and looked over his shoulder. Billy Maxwell was about to run him over. Lunch line was moving again, and the hungry third graders were getting restless. Perhaps there would be a revolt. Sam crept forward and held his tray out for the lunch lady to fill his plate. One of the steaming broccoli spears spilled off his tray and onto the floor. It rolled smack into Caitlin's shoe. "Ew," she shrieked. "Sam Jackson, get your food off of me." "Sorry," said Sam. He reached down to grab the broccoli, but she kicked it across the floor before he could do anything. "It's organic now, Caitlin," laughed Billy. Sam picked up a milk carton from the rack at the end of the line and headed over to his class's third grade table. Lunch was already more than halfway over. His friends were almost finished with their lunches they'd brought from home. Sam sat at the end of the table and scarfed his food down. Kids were raising a racket. Cafeteria grew louder and louder. Maybe it was the bad food. Or the weather. Ever since last week, when the late February days were unseasonably warm, everyone seemed to be acting nuts. Sam's mom said the weather was giving all the kids spring fever, whatever that was. Maybe if Sam went to the nurse, she would give him some real food. As Sam finished off his second chicken nugget, a voice blasted from the cafeteria PA system. "Third grade, quiet down!" It was Miss Saltwater, the cafeteria monitor. She ruled the cafeteria with an iron fist, the microphone being her weapon of choice. "It is entirely too loud in here, students." Since she talked with the microphone so close to her mouth, it sounded more like rah, rah, rah. Sam thought the mic might actually be in her mouth. Maybe she had swallowed it and sounded like that even when she was away from school. He shuddered just thinking about running into Miss Saltwater in town. Her name was actually Miss Saltwater, but everyone called her Saltwater because she was so mean, like a shark. Maybe she'd eaten too many of the chicken nuggets. Or a kid. The third grade did not quiet down enough to please Miss Saltwater. Everyone had to finish their lunch period with their heads down on the tables while she walked up and down the aisles like a prison guard. She swung the microphone back and forth in her hands like one of those batons used for beating people. Sam peeked up from his arms once when she walked by, and he swore she was growling. Brandon was making faces at him from across the table until Miss Saltwater came up behind him, smacking her hand down on the lunch table. Bang! "Quiet!" she yelled. Yikes. Eventually the bell rang. Much to Miss Saltwater's disappointment, the students were released to their classrooms. When Sam's class got back to their desks, his teacher, Mrs. Happerwink, had written something on the whiteboard in big block letters. Richmond's history. Before she could begin speaking, a hand went up in the back of the room. It was Billy Maxwell. "Yes, Billy? What is it? I haven't even asked a question yet." "Are we all going to die?" he shouted. Everyone burst out laughing. Billy gave a high five to Brandon Perth, who was sitting next to him like they just scored a goal. "Billy, what on earth are you talking about?" Mrs. Happerwink sighed. "Well, the board says Richmond's history, so I figured we'd all be goners since we live in Richmond." More laughter ensued. Brandon clutched his stomach and acted like he was going to roll out of his seat. Mrs. Happerwink, whom everyone but Caitlin called Mrs. H, looked exasperated. She glanced up at the clock like she was counting the minutes left until summer vacation. In the seat next to Sam, Caitlin raised her hand and until Mrs. H gave her a weary nod. "Mrs. Happerwink, are we going to talk about our field trip now? I've been reading about Richmond's history online, and in the book I checked out of the library, and I'm very excited to learn more about it on our trip." "Why, thank you, Caitlin, for being so interested in what we're learning," beamed Mrs. H. Caitlin turned around and gave Billy a look. It was the same one that she'd given Sam in the lunch line. "Tomorrow," the teacher continued, "we will be visiting St. John's Church in the historic Church Hill district of Richmond. Can anyone tell me what is so special about Church Hill?" There's a church there?" shouted Tommy Banks to a shower of chuckles from the class. Caitlin's hand shot up once again. Thankfully, Mrs. H ignored it this time. Sam didn't know if he could bear to hear her superior voice give yet another snotty answer today. He tried to think about the question. For some reason, St. John's Church sounded very familiar to him, but he couldn't remember why. "I'll give you a hint, boys and girls. It has to do with a very famous speech given around the time of the American Revolution. Sam's thoughts came together all at once. That's it! He raised his hand. Sam, do you know the answer? Mrs. H. asked, sounding a bit surprised. Sam and his family had just moved to Virginia the previous summer. As a result, he hadn't learned as much about the local history and places as the rest of the class. Caitlin squirmed in her seat. She raised her hand higher, not wanting to miss out on the opportunity to show off more of her knowledge. Sam cleared his throat. That's where Patrick Henry gave his speech about liberty. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Caitlin lower her hand and sink into her seat like a deflated balloon. He said, "Give me liberty or give me death." "See? Death! We're all going to die!" Billy yelled again. "We're doomed!" The class busted out laughing again. "Out in the hallway, Billy," Mrs. H. ordered. "Now!" Billy sauntered out of the room with his head held high like he had just won the jackpot. Caitlin stuck her tongue out at him as he walked by her desk. Sam just shook his head. Billy was funny sometimes, but he always went too far. It was just like Sam's older brother, Derek, who was almost 11 and down the hall in 4th grade. He always tried to be a comedian and thought he was God's gift to the world. Mrs. H. turned back to Sam. "That's correct, Sam. Very impressive. Patrick Henry delivered a passionate plea for Virginia to provide troops for the American Revolution against England. It took place during the Second Virginia Convention in 1775. They met in St. John's Church because at the time it was the only building in Richmond big enough to hold everyone. Tomorrow we'll take buses to the church, and there may even be a short reenactment of that famous speech. I'd like everyone to read the chapter in your textbook about the Revolution, beginning on page 249. To make our trip more meaningful, you'll want to know about several other important people and events that started the Revolution." Sam thought back to why he remembered Patrick Henry. Right after his family moved to Virginia from up north last summer, he and Derek made an amazing discovery. They found an old coin collection that had been stolen from the Virginia Museum 60 years earlier. Some of the rarest and most valuable coins were the 1877 Indian head cents. Since they had a picture of Lady Liberty wearing a feather headdress, it had reminded their mom of Patrick Henry's famous Liberty speech given nearby. Maybe some history does come in handy, decided Sam, as Mrs. H. went over the details of the trip. Most of the history they learned in school seemed so boring, but it might be pretty cool to see the actual place where Patrick Henry gave his speech. As they got off the bus that afternoon, Sam told Derek about the plans for his class trip the next day. "No way," said his brother. "That sounds cool. I wonder if Patrick Henry's ghost haunts the place." "I don't think he was buried there, Derek. It's just where he gave the speech." "Well, keep a lookout for his ghost, just in case. It's an old church, and you know what they have at old churches." Derek looked at Sam with a spooky grin. "What? What do they have at old churches?" Sam couldn't help asking. Derek leaned into Sam's face, opening his eyes wide. "Graveyards," he whispered, followed by a loud "Boo!" Sam jumped, and Derek ran down the driveway, laughing like a maniac all the way to their house where Mom was waiting on the porch. Even though Sam knew Derek was just messing with him, he didn't like talking about ghosts or graveyards. They scared him. He tried to think about Patrick Henry giving his speech and not about whether he was now a ghost. He was thankful the field trip was during the daytime. Nothing creepy could happen then. Chapter 2, The Graveyard. The 2 yellow school buses chugged up the steep hill, coming to an idle next to the curb. Sam and the rest of his class filed out onto the sidewalk and looked around. A black wrought iron fence lined both corners of the block like edges of a triangle. The fence had sharp decorative points along the top that looked like spears, the kind that always seemed to be waiting to impale someone. Sam imagined trying to climb the iron bars and accidentally slipping and falling onto one of the points and watching his guts spill out. That would not be good. Below the fence were rows of crusty red bricks. Like everything else he could see, they looked extremely old. That makes sense, thought Sam, since it was back in the 1700s when Patrick Henry spoke here. He peered through the iron bars and up the hill. A stately white steeple poked up from behind a tree. That must be St. John's Church. He eyed the grounds around the church and then gulped. They were littered with faded, crooked headstones and tall gray concrete and marble monuments. It was a cemetery. "Great," muttered Sam. "Hey, Jackson." Billy walked up behind Sam. "You know why they have this fence around the graveyard?" "No, why?" "Because people are dying to get in." "Ha ha," laughed Billy. Sam rolled his eyes. "Get it? They're dying to get in. It's a cemetery." "Yeah, I get it. It's hilarious," Sam said in a voice that made it clear he didn't think it was very hilarious. Mrs. H marched the kids up the steps to the cemetery entrance. They stood in the groups of threes that she had constructed. Somehow, Sam had been stuck with both Billy and Caitlin. Definitely not a match made in heaven, as his mom would say. He wasn't sure what was worse. Billy's jokes, Caitlin's snobbery, or the cemetery. He tried not to look at the tombstones and the grass all around him, but he couldn't help it. Caitlin was acting like a tour guide and kept blabbing about every detail they passed. "Look, this person was born in 1723. This one in 1747. Wow, 1711. "We get it," said Sam, trying to keep his eyes on the sidewalk. "They're old." "Hey, Caitlin, you know why they have fences around graveyards?" "Shut up, Billy," she retorted and walked around to the back of another big stone monument. Before Billy could give a comeback, Caitlin shouted to them, "Look at this one. He was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. That is so amazing." "What would be amazing," said Billy, "is if Mrs. H gave Sam and me our independence and moved you out of our group, Caitlin." This was going to be a long day. Sam walked up to the gravestone to see what Caitlin was carrying on about. He was still getting used to seeing so many historical things all over the place in Virginia. It was pretty cool that the tombstones were so ancient. Not ancient like the pyramids in Egypt or the Colosseum in Rome, but they were ancient for America. "George Wythe," Sam read on the stone. He pronounced the last name with a long Y, like I. Did he really sign the Declaration of Independence? Caitlin wriggled her nose. "Yes, he did. And his name is pronounced with, Sam. Like, I can't believe that I have to be with Billy all day on this field trip." It wasn't enough that Caitlin knew who this guy was. Of course, she had to know how to pronounce his name correctly as well. Caitlin would take any chance she could to act smart. Sam didn't want to encourage her, but he couldn't help being curious. "Okay, but didn't our books say that Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence?" Caitlin gave him another look like she couldn't believe he didn't already know that answer. "Thomas Jefferson wrote it, but all the members of the Continental Congress signed it, including George Wythe," she explained, dragging out Wythe's last name. "It rhymes with Smith." Mrs. H called all the groups over to the church entrance. A tour guide wearing funny-looking clothes from colonial times stepped in front of them. Sam looked him over and was immediately grateful not to have lived back then. The man had navy blue pants that just barely covered his knees, with tall white socks that reminded Sam of a baseball uniform. He wore a yellow vest and a white shirt underneath. It was tied tightly around his neck. Had strange ruffly cuffs on his wrists. On top, he wore a dark blue coat with lots of gold buttons. Judging by the way he was sweating, the outfit must have been really hot. The tour guide... Wow, this chapter 2 goes on a ways. Okay. The tour guide wore a white wig over his real hair with a ponytail down the back tied in a big bow. It reminded Sam of pictures he'd seen of George Washington, but he'd never thought about George Washington looking so weird. The oddly dressed tour guide led them through the doors of the old church. First thing Sam noticed were rows and rows of dark wooden benches. Each bench had a high back separating it from the one behind it. Halfway down the bench was a divider, sectioning them like booths at a restaurant without any tables in the middle. On the end of each row there was a door, and when it was shut, the pew looked like a rectangular box. Sam imagined sitting on the benches for church on Sunday. There weren't any seat cushions, and the backs were angled straight up. He couldn't decide which looked more uncomfortable, the seats or the clothes. Dealing with both at the same time must have been horrible. The tour guide launched into the full history of St. John's Church, starting with its construction way back in 1741. Class followed him through the aisles to the spot where historians believed Patrick Henry stood when he delivered his "Give me liberty" or "Give me death" speech. The guide rambled on for what seemed like an hour about why the speech was so important. Sam stopped listening to the tour guide somewhere around his description of the Second Continental Congress. He was sure it was all very important, but he really needed to use the bathroom. The ride on the bus hadn't been that long, but Billy had brought a giant-sized bottle of sports drink. Unfortunately, Sam had drunk a little too much. There was something about that lemon-lime flavor that made him have to pee like a racehorse. Sam found his way over to Mrs. H in the back of the group, and when he told her his dilemma, she pointed to the side door and whispered for him to come straight back. Sam found a sign pointing to the left that said restrooms and headed in that direction. He went through a side door and found himself back outside again. A hodgepodge of gravestones and outbuildings were set on a slope around the church. The black impaling fence surrounded him in all directions. One building had a sign that read, "Gift Shop." Like everything else, it was made of bricks and dripped of oldness. It had a few signs and shirts for sale in the window. A couple of them said, "If this be treason, make the most of it. Patrick Henry, 1765. Sam wasn't sure what that meant. He'd have to ask Mrs. H later. Patrick Henry seemed to be kind of a loudmouth. He reminded Sam of Caitlin. Sam walked down the slope and around the corner of the church. He saw a large metal door to what looked like the basement. It was slightly ajar with an unlocked padlock hanging from the doorframe. He hoped this was the way to the bathroom. It didn't really look like it, but the sign had pointed this way and he didn't see anything else. He reached out and gave the door a tug. It opened with a dim hallway stretching ahead of him. Walls were made of rough stone, and a single light bulb hung down from a wire on the ceiling. "Oh, this can't be right," mumbled Sam. But he really had to go, so he moved into the hallway. Maybe bathrooms were always dark in dark basement hallways during colonial times. Sam wandered through the dark corridor, keeping a hand on the wall to maintain his balance. The stone floor was uneven, and he caught his toe on a couple of rocks that were sticking up in his path. He was about to give up and turn around when he heard something up ahead. He stopped in his tracks, thinking about Patrick Henry's ghost. He listened carefully and heard a man's voice coming from around the bend. "You sure you hit the right spot?" "I don't see anything," the voice said. Another man answered, "Yeah, it's right here. I walked it off exactly from upstairs. This wall is right underneath the..." What was that crazy phrase? "Underneath the one who spoke of liberty," said the other one. "Yeah, right, that one. But there's nothing here. Measure it yourself if you don't trust me." "If Jerry thinks we messed this up, we'll be dead meat." Maybe this Sweeney guy didn't know what he was talking about. Where'd Jerry find that diary anyway? Up in his attic or something? All that gibberish about the marker, blah, blah. If I wanted a history lesson, I would have gone to college. This church is like 200 years old. Who knows what could have happened during that time? Sam pushed his body against the stone wall, afraid to move a muscle. This definitely wasn't the way to the bathroom. He knew he should get out of there, but he was curious to know what these guys were talking about. He didn't recognize the names Sweeney or Jerry. Did something else happen here 200 years beside Patrick Henry's speech? The man started talking again. Listen, all that stuff is Jerry's job, not ours. He's the fancy historian. We're just supposed to dig. Then the sound of metal against stone echoed down the hall. Sam took 2 steps forward. He leaned around the corner to get a look at the men. They had their backs to him and were working with a crowbar to pry some old stones out of the wall. This was getting too weird. Sam turned to sneak out. Instead, he smacked hard into a wall and nearly fell over. Well, at least it had felt like a wall. Sam looked up and saw it was actually a man, a big one. "Where do you think you're going, kid?" Tall man snarled. Sam couldn't see him very well in the shadowy hallway, but this wasn't one of the men he'd been watching. Sam's cheek ached. He must have smashed his face into one of the big gold buttons on the man's jacket. Stuttered Sam. I was looking for the bathroom, but I think I'm lost." "What are you looking at in there?" The man stepped back closer to the light bulb. He was dressed in one of the colonial costumes, just like their tour guide. This guy must work here. He'd know what to do, thought Sam. "There's 2 men back there digging in the wall. Kind of look like they might be stealing something," Sam explained in a low voice. 2 guys, huh? Well, let's go check it out. Sam turned to leave using the door he'd come in by. He'd seen more than enough for one day. Mrs. H was probably wondering where he'd gone by now. He took a step forward, but the man grabbed his shirt with a jerk. Not so fast, kid. You're coming too." Sam's body tensed. He started sweating as the big man pulled him down the passageway. No, really, I've seen enough," Sam cried. He tried to pull away, but his feet were lifted right off the ground. The man seemed to be as strong as a linebacker. They turned the corner and came up behind the other men. "Making enough noise, you idiots?" yelled the tall man. "You are supposed to be out of here already. There are tours up there." Sam felt dizzy. This guy was with the other 2? He shouldn't have come down here. What were they going to do to him? "Who's the kid, Jerry?" He was watching you from the hallway." "He saw everything, didn't you, kid?" Tall man named Jerry asked. No, really, I didn't see anything," Sam stammered. "I'm just trying to find the bathroom. I need to get back to my class. Really, I gotta go." "We'll see about that." Jerry shoved Sam against the wall. Sam's heart felt like it was about to explode out of his chest. Would Mrs. H hear him if he screamed as loud as he could? Jerry turned and looked at the hole the other men had dug. "Well, where is it?" "There's nothing here, Jerry. We followed the directions you told us exactly. Nada. That Sweeney guy must have it wrong." Jerry smacked the man on the head. "What is the matter with you? Don't use any names in front of the kid." He turned and glared at Sam. Sam felt like he was going to puke. This couldn't be happening. He bent over and stared down at his feet. There was a baseball-sized rock against the wall next to him. When he glanced up, the men were all staring at the hole in the wall on the other side of the small room. No one was looking at him. Almost without thinking, Sam reached down and picked up the rock. He heaved it at the big man in front of him. Since Jerry was so close, Sam's only choice was to aim for his legs. The rock hit Jerry square in the side of the kneecap, bouncing off with a thud. "Ah!" the man screamed, falling onto his other knee. "What the?" One of the other guys whirled around to see what was going on. Sam bounced off the crouched man's shoulder and headed for the hallway. He didn't look back at the men. He just ran. Well, that's the beginning of the mystery on Church Hill. And I may have to continue reading this to you because now it's kind of got me hooked. So anyway, that's it for today. Take care of yourselves, and I'll be back again soon. Bye-bye.